so my name is Muhammed Shafee Ameermia. I am an advocate by profession and a human rights activist all my life. And I've been working for the past 7 years as a commissioner on the South African Human Rights Commission. I was introduced to the Hizmet movement in a very roundabout way. First of all, when I was a student at university, I had a very inquiring mind, because as a Muslim, I was doing soul searching for the values and ethos of an Islamic society that basically contributes to the general good of not only Muslims, but of all humanity. And I was searching and searching and searching, although I couldn't find the answers then, and I did a lot of introspection. Until one day, by chance, I came across a book in Durban at the Islamic Book Center on the works of Badi'uzzaman Nursi. And I opened the book and I read it. And it kind of just touched my heart, because it was a revelation. It just opened up everything to me. Everything that I was looking for was basically in that book. So I bought the book and I went home and I started reading and reading and reading. Having read the book of Sayyid Nursi, I understood the value of the power of speaking truth to power. That you may not be the flavor of the day when you have to stand up to the authorities and challenge the authorities on what is right and what is wrong. I mean, that's what the Quran teaches you: enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong, but also create an enabling environment for a society to exist and for the welfare of society, for the greater good. So what had happened was, I then at that particular point in time really fervently made a strong dua that I wish I could meet people of this order, the people of the Hizmet movement. If they exist, I would like to meet them. I don't see any of them in South Africa. The Hizmet movement, which I understood many years later, is the work of Badi'uzzaman Nursi translated into the work of the Hizmet movement. So when the Nizamiya Mosque was built in Johannesburg, I was equally, pleasantly kind of surprised to say that, this is a movement and let me go and see what it's all about. And so I came, at that particular point in time, it was well beyond university days now. When I read the works of Badi'uzzaman Nursi, that was in the era of 1983 and 1984. I just want you to contextualize that. So my search for these kind of values, esoteric values, higher values of freedom, dignity and equality, freedom from want, freedom from poverty, freedom from inequality, socio-economic rights, was basically something that I could identify with the works of Badi'uzzaman Nursi. And then I read about his struggles, his personal struggles in challenging a system that was totally unjust, but his ideas kept a momentum that today resulted in the Hizmet movement to be where it is. It is a global, it is a universal, it is a humanitarian organization beyond the creed of Islam, because it basically talks about service to humanity, right? Embedded and grounded in fundamental Islamic values. For me, that in itself was something very profound. And I say Hizmet movement then because I didn't know it to be a Hizmet movement, but it was a movement of some sort. But it was a movement that was going to benefit humanity. And I said to myself, and I prayed that I wish I will see the day when I will meet people in action who come from this movement, to interact with them, to see how it's done. Then eventually from Limpopo in 2014, I was appointed the commissioner on the South African Human Rights Commission for a period of 7 years. I became more attracted to the Hizmet movement because they are in Johannesburg. The headquarters is in Johannesburg. And I've been to many of their programs. I've been to many of their functions, and I realized the beauty of sharing a common humanity. A common humanity, to say that at the end of the day, all of us are one, The world is not made up of Muslims, the world is made up of human beings, and every person has a contribution to make. And what is my contribution in the greater scheme of things? When I met the Hizmet movement, it was at the moment on its back foot. As we know, the so-called coup that kind of threw everybody off course there, was meant to crush the movement. But I always say that where there's an idea, you can crush a person, but you can't crush an idea. I mean, so history has a way of repeating itself. If you look at Badiou Zaman Nursi, I mean, the idea was to put him into jail, put him into all sorts of hardships all over Turkey itself, right? And wherever he went, he just spoke the truth. And in that way, he created a momentum for the movement to germinate its own seeds and grow in leaps and bounds. So that movement went beyond the borders of Turkey, and it went through all four corners of the world. And that is why we see the Turkish Harmony Institute as being an offshoot of that in South Africa. But it also has branches and roots all over the world. What does the Hizmet movement preach? It preaches sharing and caring. In South African terms, we call it Ubuntu. We can't sleep properly if our neighbor has got no food. But that's an Islamic ethos as well. But equally so, it's a universal religious ethos. I always say to people, don't go to church on a Sunday or to the synagogue on a Saturday or to a mosque on a Friday once a week and think that you're going to clear your conscience out by putting a 10 cents in a tin there, so that the church or the synagogue or the mosque can now give a plate of food there. And the rest of the week you become heathens, in the disobedience of the commands of God. It doesn't work like that. You've got to practice it yourself. You've got to internalize it. You've got to understand what shared values are. And you've got to basically promote those shared values for the greater and good of society. The noteworthy aspects of the Hizmet movement is basically the upliftment of humanity. In the form of education. And I saw a tremendous opportunity for the upliftment of society through the power of education. And education has always been that key that can always take people out of poverty, inequality, and the morass of all kinds of socio-economic ills. Because if you liberate a mind, you liberated the soul. And as you liberated the soul, people begin to do things differently despite their socio-economic conditions. Now let me start here with the Hizmet movement in particular. So the Hizmet movement, in my understanding, came into South Africa post-1994. And the core business was education. And who did they educate? They educated the historically disadvantaged black society in this country, primarily the African children. Remember, in apartheid days, under the Verwoerdian government, a black child was not supposed to go beyond standard 5, which is grade 8. So what I've seen is the Hizmet movement in action, beyond the rhetoric of talk. Mm-hmm. So what did they do? So they turned it around. The Hizmet movement in this country played a tremendous role because we understood, as I said, so it was grade 7 that African children were not allowed to go beyond in the apartheid days. Okay, I remember I was a legal advisor in the Department of Education in Limpopo, and I used to fight the farmers who had farm schools, and those farm schools were only until grade 7. And the idea is once the child comes out of that, he must basically go and look after the cattle and the sheep, while his father will work in the fields and his mother will work in the kitchen of the farmer. That's slavery. Now, obviously that has changed since 1994. We realized two things: that in order to empower a society, they need maths and science skills. So this is where the Hizmet movement came in very strongly. They came in with that knowledge base of a team of experts in maths and science, and they started working and plowing into the education system with the blessings of the government of the day. 25 years later, what do we see? We see that all the star schools that were created by the Hizmet movement, addressing the needs of socio-economic disadvantaged children. We have produced the best results with the Ivy League private schools of this country. The history is there, the data is there, there's empirical evidence to that effect. So basically what we're saying is we don't need philosophers. We need activists who are scientists and mathematicians who can understand that in order to build roads, to build clinics, to build schools, to build houses, you need engineers, you need architects. Those have to be scientifically orientated in those things. You need doctors, health workers, and they are coming out from your institutions in their numbers. And they are coming out from socio-economic hard backgrounds. And so you have a proud record to be part of this, the change agents of a movement that is basically living up to the ideals of Badiou Zaman Nursi. The interfaith movement has a phenomenal role to play, a very important role to play in the social cohesion of a society, especially a society like South Africa, where social cohesion and intolerances make a constitutional democracy very fragile. So we need to cement these relationships to basically bring people together. Now the importance of this is to make them understand what it's about. I think it's extremely important, and I think this is one of the strong points of the Hizmet movement, because we have an intellectual capacity to engage with society at all different levels. They may not sing from the same hymn book like you, but it breaks down barriers, it breaks down the distinctions, in society. So when you have tolerance, people will understand why you're doing certain things, So these interfaith movements are extremely important. I think they should be encouraged. Nobody's here to convert anybody into anybody else's religion and so forth. But I think we are basically saying that the generosity of spirit of human beings is counter to the spirit of materialism. It reminds me of Nelson Mandela when after he was released, he went back to Robben Island, and he was asked by a high-level delegation from an international community, because one of these people basically stood in his cell and held those bars and felt totally overwhelmed, and said to Nelson Mandela, "Did you ever think that you were going to come out of this place?" Because it was on an island. It was like Alcatraz in San Francisco. Okay, it was maximum security, and it was the harshest conditions any human being would have faced in their lives. And they asked Nelson Mandela, "Did you ever think you were going to be released from here? Because you were given, a life sentence here." And he said yes. And they asked him, "But why did you say that?" He said, "Every morning when I got up from my sleep, I looked outside the cell window, and I looked and I saw Table Mountain. And that was the inspiration." So he said, not only did I know I was going to come out of here, but I also knew I was going to come out of there and lead the same country that put me in here as well. So it's a famous poem I would encourage all the Hizmet teachers to read Abou bin Adam. It's a famous poem of Abou bin Adam, And it's the same higher values that kept Nelson Mandela alive, despite the harshest conditions that he had been to. Think about it. His condition was what? He was in solitary confinement there. He was alone in his cell, right? Secondly, he was separated from his family. His children were not allowed to see him. His son died while he was there. Okay. The first time that his daughters were able to see him was when they were 16 years. Okay. But that picture in his mind kept him alive. So what kept him alive was a higher value of justice that prevailed upon him. Despite the harsh injustice that were prevailed upon him, the man could think differently. And what made it even worse, for the apartheid, this thing, as much as they wanted to break not only his body but also his spirit, was that when he came out of there, he came out as a forgiving man. Because he knew he had to serve a greater purpose. You see? And even when he came out, his personal life, we know, was not a walk in the park. Eventually he and his wife separated. That was an unfortunate thing. But the man had the mind. And so my message to all these people in exile, in diaspora, wherever they are, that they should not lose hope. Because they have what we call the higher esoteric values for which they have committed themselves in their own lives. Remember, why do you want to go to university when your friend next door goes straight into business and he makes millions? Why? Because you feel that you have a greater contribution to make in a certain way. Okay? And that was your contribution to the upliftment of society. Not only here, but all over the world. Now the Hizmet movement is based on the sacrifices of people who had noble ideas, and through the nobility and the generosity of spirit, they could rise above themselves. And as I said, you can kill a person, but you can never kill a movement, nor can you kill an idea. And that is the strength of the Hizmet movement. So the people in Turkey may not know this, of your contribution. And maybe it's your fault. You haven't told them enough about your success story. Maybe you were too humble about it. But I always say in South Africa is the same story. The Hizmet movement has a tremendous role to play in this country, in South Africa per se. For the people of Turkey, they should know that their sons and daughters who went throughout the four corners of the world have made a contribution for which they themselves can be very proud of. Okay? They didn't keep it to themselves. I see a lot of similarities, and I don't see any differences. It's maybe the same, it's the same side, two sides of the same coin. The only difference is Mandela was heavily involved in politics, and his politics shaped the discourse of a just society. Fethullah Gülen on the other side, right, on the other end, was not a politician. He's not a politician. He comes from a Sufi order that basically talks about a world of justice, a world of peace, a world of tolerance. He understood the power of the pen and the power of education. And in every discourse that he makes throughout the world, that message resonates all the time. To tell the people that we do not live in an ideal world. We live in a real world. But what we have to do is marry the ideal with the real and come to a kind of a solution for the betterment of humanity. You see? Remember, whether it's the Torah, whether it's the Bible, or whether it's the Holy Quran, the message is one. It's an ideal message, right? In the name of God and in the service of humanity. That's the ideal. People have been persecuted because of that. People's feathers have been ruffled because of that. People have been jailed because of that. People like Badiou Zaman, people have been exiled because of that. But they never wavered from the fundamental principle of connecting humanity with the universal truth of love, peace and justice. You see? And that in itself will carry the movement and every other movement that has similar aims and objectives to bring out that kind of ethos in people oppressors come and go in every society. And indeed, what is unforgivable is when you can throw mothers who had just given birth to babies into prison. Unconscionably. You can suspend the rule of law and throw things out of the window at your whims and fancies. When a country embarks on those kind of things, on that road, it's basically a road to disaster. My message to all people who are suffering these kind of fates is to be very strong in prayer. You know, the history of Islam is such that for 13 years, in the formative years of Islam, there's a rich history, a very rich history. It was an oppressive history, a history where at one point in time, it became so severe that the family of the Prophet ﷺ, his family had to endure the hardest hardships any society could prevail. Right, where they were even eating, there's history records that they were even eating the leaves of trees. But that came to an end as well, you know. So equally so, like I said, when people usurp power positions for selfish interest, history has a way, a very, very phenomenal way of addressing that imbalance. One must never lose hope. You know, the reason for that is because at the end of the day, all religions teach you that under the most adverse conditions, that is when your test of faith will come. You know, you'll never be tested in ideal conditions. I mean, why do you people? Why when everybody's got all material things to their benefit, why would they want to be tested? But the true test of a person is when they have to bite the bullet, like what's happening in Turkey. The question is, I'm going to throw the ball back into the court of the Hizmet movement. Is the Hizmet movement prepared to forgive the oppressors for what they've done to them? That is the test. If you can answer that one, then you've liberated yourself from the oppression itself. Because then the oppressor becomes a prisoner of his own conscience. The question is, where do you fit in that equation? I think that's the message that we need to be reflecting on now. For me, it was a dream come true, starting with Badiou Zaman Nursi, eventually in 2017 meeting Hojaefendi in person and sitting in his company, which was a very auspicious occasion for me. It was a very privileged occasion. And that was perhaps one of the greatest moments in my life, because here I saw a man whose simplicity basically knocked the socks out of me. Because when I went to his camp in Pennsylvania, I mean, what did I see? I saw a room. His bedroom was 2 by 2. I mean, 1 by 1, not even 2 by 2. The man slept on the floor, right? His living reality was he practiced the Quran. I observed very carefully the movement and what it stands for. And it really, really, really resonated with my own personal beliefs. And then I said to myself, I'm so glad that in the 21st century we still have people like him who can continue the work of Badiou Zaman Nursi, you know, and may Allah reward them for their astounding efforts and their contributions for the upliftment of humanity. To say that what I've read along the way is what I'm seeing of a person, and the growth of this movement, which is a universal movement, and the kind of things that it expounds, for me was absolutely brilliant.